you clicked on this video. Chances are you're tired of your art looking like those anime memes. Alright? You know what I'm talking about, alright? We're gonna move on into a more spiritually enlightened plane of existence where our line art looks crunchy. All of the adjectives to describe eating. If that's what you're here for, you better strap in. If you're ready, let's do it. Much better. If you couldn't tell, I'm in a bit of a new space. That is because me and my significant other moved. It's great. It's lovely, actually. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Hold on. Honestly, I know a lot of people hate the line art process. It's honestly what drives so many people to just end up doing sketches and just leaving it with the sketch and then painting over it. Me personally, I hate painting. So me and line art have a relationship that's like this. You know what I'm saying? Because you hate line art, probably. I'm just guessing. We're gonna teach you how to like it and treat it more like a painting process. A lot of people experience this disconnect between their finished piece or the line art and the sketch. And some people really hate that. So I'm going to show you essentially how to bridge that gap. First of all, notice what you want to keep in the sketch. Second of all, what do you like about the sketch? There are multiple different things that you could like. You might like the amount of detail, you might like the lack of detail, you might like the thickness that it has, like this messy, gritty. It's essentially helping us figure out what you are going to keep in the line art, what you're going to outline, etc. That is step one. Now, step two is actually about brush personality. What is that?
Oh my God! What is that?
What type of pen is it? That is the first characteristic. Is it a dip pen? Is it a pencil? Is it supposed to be an ink brush? What are the characteristics of that brush that it's trying to imitate? And how can you apply them better to your piece? Next is the brush texture. The brush texture is the grain, the gaps, and the streaks. So anything, and this is separate from the type because the type of brush is how it acts in real life versus the brush texture is what you're trying to capture and then slap it on the paper. The texture can also add a lot of inconsistency if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for consistency, that's kind of where our next brush characteristic comes in. Brush angle. Where is it rotating? Is the brush rotating with you? Is it on a specific axis? What is it you're looking for in the rotation of the brush versus if you were to just let the brush stay stationary? Next, we have opacity. Does it fade? Does it trail off after a little bit when you let go? Is that what you want? Are you looking for something that is transparent and easy to have the color come through? There is a lot of different things that the opacity can actually grant you as far as adding interest to your line art. Another characteristic would be the actual thickness. Are you going to stay consistent with the same thickness throughout the entirety of the piece, or are you going to differ? The inside is small, the outside is thick. Are you going to use lighting to actually figure out where the thickness is going to apply? Is it going to be on the right side of the line? Is it going to be on the left side? Is it going to be up, down? You know, the orientation of the thickness can also add a lot. The last characteristic and the last part of a brush's personality is actually its shape. Are you using a square brush? If you are, what do you notice that adds to it? Does it make you think outside the box more? Does it make you stay more consistent? What does it do? There's round brushes as well, which are the most common because they're so smooth and consistent. And when they rotate, it doesn't usually cause you any issues unless, of course, the thickness changes when you rotate or apply pressure. So with all of that said, brush personality is extremely important, but actually mastering the fundamentals of what it means to level up your specific line art takes just basic knowledge. Step 3, once you have a brush, well, you may or may not be set, because how you keep sketch consistency can make or break the entire thing. No pressure. How do you keep your line art super similar to your sketch? It is the question that all artists ask when they take off that layer or they erase that sketch that's underneath the line art and only find disappointment. My answer to this is treat your sketch like a coloring book.
What do you mean? Oh my god, that doesn't make any sense to me.
When you go to fill in a line, or when you go to draw over the line, are you just simply drawing over it? Are you not accounting for the gaps that are on the side that the sketch clearly shows visible? Are you filling in the entire thing? Are you going over the entirety of that sketch? Or are you just outlining it? Just outlining things and not keeping in the form intact, not keeping the random details that you added for shading. Those are really important steps that you need to take account for. We'll kind of go over this and I'll actually show you these things, but I'm just putting it into perspective and actually giving you a verbal understanding of what I'm talking about. Our 4th step in this entire process is going to be emphasis. Emphasis is the second most important step. Understanding your sketch and your brushes and stuff is so much more important. But emphasis can actually show your understanding of these fundamentals very vividly. When we go in for emphasis, it's what we're adding that already emphasizes like what we already put down. This 5th step is going to be our application, and you're gonna just see how I go about doing the entirety of the steps in my regular workflow, because I think it's extremely important to see how I do the whole line art process together, because it doesn't all just go in sequence with the steps. I usually end up doing them all throughout while I'm lining. So definitely keep an eye out for that while I'm explaining it. It is Future Angie, and I'm here to explain the brushes. I have this ginseng ink full brush, and I love this brush because it's so sharp and yummy. But then, when you start to notice the pixels a little too much, and if that's what you're going for, that's great, but it can be a little sad. So we're not gonna go with this one. Now onto the brush that I actually use the most, which is my smooth brush. This one is great because it the opacity fades when you flick it, so it's pretty similar to, I want to say, like a brush pen, and also it can get very thin but also very thick, and it takes like really nice pressure gestures and everything like that, which is the line art style that I prefer. We have this other brush that I call the Nariander, and it wouldn't really be considered a line art brush, but I've seen styles where they use that type of brush. And then I have this one that I made, and it's called Line Art Master. It essentially is a really stiff, perfect for making really smooth lines, and it can get really thin, but that's not really what I want for today, so we're not going with this one either. And then we have the scratch board. This one is just really interesting because it's one of those square ones that I was talking about, but it has those really weird corners, so I didn't really want to go with that one. My tapered flat brush is actually the one that I use for a lot of messy sketches and line art. I don't know how to explain it.
Like Niffings here.
But that was it for my brush recap. Let's get into it. I'm kind of changing my opacity here because I'm making sure that I can actually see and know what I'm supposed to be filling in. That test line was violently chicken scratch and I apologize, but we're actually starting on the face because it's extremely important. I'm staying pretty true to the sketch by following and actually filling in the red with the black, you know? Just because it keeps the consistency of the sketch and can give you an idea of what the brush strokes are also supposed to look like. Definitely sketch with a conscience here because it's actually really therapeutic, A, and B, it also helps you keep track of what type of brush strokes you want to put on. Like, do you want a more jagged feel? Do you want a taper, etc.? That's kind of like where the brushes come in, but also you can bend the brush to your will, so never forget. Choosing to feather your lines actually adds a more lifelike approach and can actually add a lot more motion and flow to your line art, which is usually what people struggle with most, and that's why your sketches are much preferred to doing your line art or seeing the line art compared to the sketch.
Taking some creative liberties and adding a line, even if it's literally super thin on the sketch and you can't really see it that much, can make a huge difference. So definitely don't, I guess, ignore some of your lines on the sketch.
That very minuscule line can make the huge difference between what is seen as just one singular line and what is seen as a complex line that branches out into many different forms.
This here would be a good example because I can't decide if I should go with the thickness or actually just follow the sketch. And inevitably, it's better to just follow the sketch because it can help astronomically with any type of flow that you're looking for. And don't be afraid to refine your lines your way by just drawing it in.
And by drawing it in, I mean refining the line yourself with multiple strokes. Following every line, no matter how big or small, just like this one, can actually make a huge difference in the sketch actually translating to your line art. So definitely pick up on really small lines. That's not to say your bad lines, if that makes any sense. Like the ones that make the sketch muddy, obviously don't use those ones. One thing I really want to stress is your opacity and also how you draw off a line because it indicates how intentionally that you placed that line. If you made it really thin and it's kind of wobbly and it's not really that strong, it obviously is not meant to be there. And you also need to treat lines like focal points. The ones that are thick are going to draw attention. The ones that are thin are going to indicate details, and if you have too many details, it can be really distracting. Also make sure to pay attention to if your line makes sense. And exactly what I mean by that is, if you placed a line there, what is that line? Do you know what that line is? Is it trying to embrace contour? Is it shading? Is it a wrinkle on the face? Is it a beauty mark? What is that line? Here, there is a lot of lines, but they all actually have purpose. Like, a lot of these lines are supposed to indicate the folding of the eyelid or the actual shading on the other side of the eyelash instead of just making like a singular eyelash, and then also the tear drop area. I don't remember how to say that. I'm like at a loss for words right now. But essentially, they all have a purpose. This is an area where I used a lot of line differentiation because you can see how like it starts off very thin and then ends up extremely thick towards the bottom. But this was done in like one stroke, and it could also be done in many, but it's still adds a lot because it shows a little bit of the shadow. It shows how important the bridge of the nose is in comparison to how the bridge of the nose starts out and continues on to the most important parts of the face and structure of the nose. I also outlined the small details in the sketch, especially on the face. They're the most prominent and important because that's actually what you're most attracted to when you're doing your sketches, is the little tiny details on the face, because the face is just like where humans' attention is drawn to. So yeah.
I mostly use detail lines to actually indicate shadows and really small folds in the face that you don't really want to draw too much attention to, because otherwise it looks like wrinkles. The coverage versus the overshoot is actually one of the most important parts about this process, because how much you can get away with not filling versus how much you can get away with overfilling can actually make or break what you're trying to accomplish with the weight of each line. And then here in these lips, you'll kind of see like the distinction between overshoot and coverage. So essentially you want to make sure you're filling in the sketch and like exactly where you put the sketch, but then also choosing where you overshoot that to see if it's a more creative approach. Because before, the lips were a little bit wobbly because I didn't actually put that much time into them in the sketch, so the time that we put into them will actually be here instead. This is one of those areas where it's completely fine to differ completely. I just said completely way too many times, that's fine. Anywho's, the reason being for this is that sometimes the charm of a line is how random it is. And you may be like, doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of what everything else you need to say? And I'm like, no, it's because you need to understand the purpose behind your lines. If the fact that you like them is because they have no purpose, then keep it that way. You can also approach your lines many different ways. Here you'll see that like I'm drawing in multiple strokes to thicken the line, but then over here I do like a weird shape outline thing and just color it in. Like I said, there's so many ways that you can do this. As long as you're treating your sketch like a coloring book, there really is no wrong way to do this. As I'm doing the hair, you can kind of see how there's a thick to thin, and I'm not applying it extremely consistently because sometimes the actual subject requires variation. For the most part, it's a thin to thick, and the thickness is at the base of the hair, and that's just to show how the shadow and how there's actual depth in comparison to the areas that probably have a lot more light showing or shining on them. This area is one of the most confusing ones because I still don't know how I should have approached this one area of the hair. It's clearly supposed to be like an open gap where like you can see more hair,
And showing depth with that was more of just like me adding strands of how the shadows would come in. And that's kind of how you can look at line art, is just by adding shadows. Like I eventually ended up like trying to fill it in, but I did not like how that looked, so we ended up sticking kind of with this. To many of you, you might be like, how did I get the first stroke like perfect? See, that one was perfect, but then like I doubted myself and chose to go a completely different route. And now that I'm looking at this, like this would have been fine, but like I was just being like so picky, and then like trying to go the other direction. Like instead of starting from the top or like from the head, I tried going from the bottom of the strand of hair, which honestly can make a huge difference. So definitely try out different methods of actually pulling the line. You'll kind of notice throughout my process, like I always like take a minute to like take a step back and like look at the whole piece, because it's just to make sure everything is coherent and actually sticking together and making sense together. A lot of times people think that you should not shake and scratch or whatever they like to call it, but I don't know if you could tell, that's kind of how I get a lot of my crispy lines, and actually being able to fully merge the two lines together is a skill in itself. And shake and scratching is totally okay if you know exactly what you're doing with it, or supposed to be doing with it. Towards the end of your line art process, you might actually get a little bit sloppy, and I don't know, sometimes with just my one crisp line, kind of like this one, it's pretty alright and it conforms to the sketch pretty well, but it definitely could also be a little bit better. I just chose to be a little bit sloppy in this sense.
Longer periods of doing your line art, you will start to notice that you start to become a lot more inconsistent, but also that leads you towards being more stylized and kind of just doing things the way that your brain is subconsciously wanting to do them.
This is one of those instances where sculpting out the line actually did not work in my favor, or at all, to be honest. As you can see, I'm kind of like struggling to make sure that the two ends meet like smoothly. To me, it still looks a little bit wobbly, and that's just like with my little picky little artist eye being like, I don't like it.
After all that frustration, we move on, because I could not take the agony anymore.
Remember this little line, or this little area over here, because we'll come back to it later.
Speaking of coming back to things later, bada bing, bada boom, we fixed that line that I was having such a hard time with. This line that I put here is actually a really good indicator of why like thin lines are so important in showing detail, because without this you wouldn't have like a section of the hair being shown or indicated or anything. And if there was a thick line, you would think that it was in front or in the back, or, you know, it was like one of the main bodies of hair, which, as you can see now, because of the thin line, is clearly untrue. This is just an insignificant part of the hair that just needs to show depth and detail. Okay, so here with the ear, you can kind of see how, like, I didn't necessarily follow my guideline. I kind of just outlined it, which is kind of what I don't think you should do if you're gonna make something like really, really on point with your sketch. Like I said, this video is mostly for the people who just like really love their sketches and then they do their line art and they're very utterly disappointed, not disappointed. Oh my god, I can't English. But anywho, I basically almost didn't follow my guideline here, but you'll see that I'll fix the ear in just a second. When you don't follow your guidelines, it can actually mess up your proportions. However, in this instance over here, it actually fits the sketch better and adds a little bit more weight and emphasis on something that probably would have just kind of been meh, you know? This was also done in one quick motion, so it provides a lot of movement and flow to the actual piece. I decided to play with the actual line thickness because originally it's pretty thick in the sketch and I was like, okay, that must mean it's like really important. But then as you can see, I kind of zoom out and I'm like, this line is not important at all. It just kind of distracts from like where the hair is actually supposed to be flowing. Yeah, I'm like, what even is going on here? So I ended up just like cutting out the line completely because in a sketch, like there can be too many lines, you know? So since I got the outline of the hair figured out, I'm basically going to go into the hair and get those lines figured out because that's actually usually the most scary, complicated part. And here I'm actually like following the line that was predetermined by me just outlining it, which actually helps really like bring it all together. And you can also see it kind of adds more dimension to the hair as well, and you can tell like where it curves and stuff. Now here you'll see me use this method I like to call a ghost line, where it's actually not a connected line and it doesn't actually have to be solid for you to understand that there's a line there. I'll kind of do like a little gap, and it's just a lot easier to do and doesn't give the harshness of a full completed line.
this was one of those areas where I definitely wish that I put more time into actually refining the sketch, but I knew and I remembered the reference and like how like a knitted sweater looks more like a braid, if that makes any sense. Yeah, when they're like really chunky fibers. So I ended up kind of scrapping what I'm doing right now because that looked very chaotic and crunchy. Okay, so here I'm actually going to turn off the sketch in order to refine the line art. It already looks pretty good, so I don't actually have to do a lot here, and that's mostly because I paid attention to my sketch so much. Mostly you'll just see me go in here and do a lot of like microscopic changes that really only I would notice probably. It's just really funny how like these types of things actually do make a difference in the quality of your line art at some point, and choosing to ignore them is totally your choice. I'm just saying that it can help in some cases. This is not a good example of one of the cases where I've used refinement like on my line art. Refinement is really important though, because especially if you do prints or stickers, everybody will be able to see all of your little mistakes. I'm just saying, I know that gives people a lot of anxiety, but if it's printed, you will see it. If you post it, no one's gonna see it. So don't put as much effort into the things that you post as much as the things that you will be giving to people to have forever. We're actually gonna take that awesome little mistake I made earlier and apply it everywhere because it added a nice stylistic touch that I love. So as you can see, I'm just kind of going in here and like adding those little, I'm gonna call them line fangs. That's what they feel like. But yeah, just putting stuff like that on there to add a little stylistic touch can set your line art apart from a lot of things, including AI. So make sure you guys are watching out there, kids. Basically, we're trying to keep the consistency here in the emphasis or in the little refinement period of the line art process, because you want every tiny little thing that may look like a mistake to not look like a mistake and actually be intentional, because you thought it was cool in one area, so you need to disperse it and put it everywhere else. Another thing that's crucial is what are you going to be using your line art for, because depending on what you're ending up using it for is what you need to use the refinement stage for. So like closing all your gaps so that you can fill it and color it later, because that's what your coloring process is like.
voila, we are done. So this is what the line art looks like in comparison to the sketch. Or I guess with the sketch underneath versus without it by itself, you know. Obviously some coloring could be used to accent the eyeshadow on the eyes that you can see in the sketch. But they look almost identical. There's obviously some things like the messiness of the sketch is not going to transfer because that's not really what we want. If that is what you want, just use the sketch as your line art, dude.
Well, I hope this video helped you stop feeling like a scaredy cat, because them lines ain't gonna hurt you. But let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns in the comments. You know, I'll be here. Anywho's, this is your neighborhood mediocre artist signing off for today. Toodles!